You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
Good afternoon and happy Wednesday, Dolphins, as I sit here and record this new edition of Dolphins Talk Weekly on Wednesday, May the 3rd, the week after the completion of the 2023 NFL Draft. And that is what this episode is going to be all about. I am your host, Kevin Dern. Please give me a follow on Twitter at KevinMD4. And you can follow along with the show on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, wherever else you listen to your podcasts. Just through a quirk in the schedule, wasn't able to record until today, but it works out well because I got some additional time to review some of the players that Miami picked and signed over the weekend for this podcast. But because it is Wednesday and it's during the day, there is no whiskey segment this week, and I could review a Diet Mountain Dew if you really wanted to, but I'll save you the time and effort on that. So let's just go ahead and jump right into things with the draft. So Thursday night, obviously, the Dolphins, no first-round pick. It was forfeited. So I went with my brother-in-law to the Cincinnati Bengals official draft party. He's a season ticket holder. He invited me. It was kind of a neat experience. Got to see their radio team cover the draft. Got to meet a couple Bengals, we'll just say legends, and we use that term loosely. Quarterback Ken Anderson, who rightly is a Bengals legend and probably deserves the nod in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, was there. James Brooks, Ickey Woods, and someone said John Kitna was there, but I did not see him throughout the evening. Ted Karras, who's a former Miami Dolphin and current Bengals center, was at the event, so it's kind of neat to see. But it was a very interesting vibe. Like, they had these big, long, sort of buffet-style tables set up. So my brother-in-law and I just, started mingling about with the crowd, and kind of the consensus was that most people wanted the Bengals to take a tight end, specifically Michael Mayer. I'll touch on that in a minute. And Jahmyr Gibbs, the Alabama running back, but he went 12 to Detroit. So it was essentially the consensus, majority of the fan pick would have been Michael Mayer. Now, he's a local product from Cincinnati, played at Covington Catholic High School, which is in northern Kentucky right across the Ohio River. Even though it is in Kentucky, it is closer to Cincinnati than most of the outlying suburbs in Ohio, or in the Cincinnati area, the greater Cincinnati limits actually are. Very close to the downtown district. And when he was available, coming to the Bengals pick at 28, there was a pretty big cheer. They started the Who Dey chant, and you started hearing the Bengals fight song in the background. And when they announced Myles Murphy, it was like someone let the air out of the balloon. Now, my brother-in-law was pretty in tune with the Bengals. He thought it was going to be a defensive lineman all along. His pick was Brian Bresee, the Clemson defensive tackle, who I believe went the very next pick to the New Orleans Saints. So, pretty interesting vibe to just hear it go from being so pumped up to just the air out of the balloon, because it wasn't the Bengals consensus. And I feel like that vibe sort of was a foreshadowing moment for the vibe that I picked up on, during the live stream I did during the draft on Friday and on Dolphins Twitter. So fast forward to Friday, I hopped on the Finside the NFL live stream with Reason, with former Dolphins great left tackle Richmond Webb, and with Martin Ukpai, who was a quarterback at Florida A&M. So the four of us were kind of talking and sort of going through round two, and I hopped on a couple picks before Miami came on the clock because our 3-year-old did not want to go to bed, and she actually made an appearance on the show. If you saw her, Emmy says hi. But kind of going into it, I felt like for me, the three players that I was really interested in that were getting closer and closer to the Dolphins pick and still being on the board were Wisconsin nose tackle Keanu Benton, Georgia tight end Darnell Washington, and Ohio State tackle DeJuan Jones. Like, those were the big three. And I had kind of talked to one of my really good Dolphins sources who, had mentioned a couple names to me, and that is how I knew about the 30 visit of the running back who wouldn't be named. That was actually Devon Achane. I could show you the text messages to prove it, but that's who it was. More on him later, obviously. So he had kind of told me he felt like the vibe would be defense. And Keanu Benton went, pick 49 to the Steelers, right in front of the Dolphins, 2 picks before. Julius Brents, a corner from Kansas State, who I had talked about a lot in previous episodes, was off the board. Brian Branch had gone off the board at 45. So Brents and Branch went 44 and 45. Cody Mock, the guard from North Dakota State, a couple picks before. So we were all watching the live stream, and Peter Schrager from NFL Network gets on and said, I feel like it's defense here. And I sort of just started racking my brain, like, defense. Like, Mozzie Smith went in round 1. He would have been a really nice fit. Keanu Benton just went off the board. They're not going to go edge. Jack Campbell's the only real linebacker I would have taken at 51. He went in the first round. So I'm just sitting there thinking, and then the name Cam Smith flashes across the board. And I think if you go back and watch, my reaction is just sort of like deadpan, like nod my head and said, wow, okay, kind of to myself and my daughter Emmy, who was right there, kind of just a little bit surprised. And I feel like that was the reaction that most Dolphins fans had. What we ended up learning about Darnell Washington and DeJuan Jones specifically probably can shed some insight into why neither of those guys were the selection at picks 51 or at pick 84. So it came out, I believe, shortly after the Dolphins picked Cam Smith, and we'll circle back to Cam and give him his flowers here in a minute. Aaron Wilson, who is an NFL insider, does a lot of reporting for the Houston Texans, put it out there that Darnell Washington got flagged for knee issues at the NFL medical recheck. Had been flagged at the combine, did the recheck thing. Knee issues. I was also told that during his time at Georgia, he fractured a foot and opted to not have the recommended surgery on that foot. So some injury issues. The knee stuff is confirmed. The foot stuff, I want to believe it's true. I'd say that source was pretty reliable. But that's probably a reason. And then it did come out that several teams had taken Washington off the board for some character issues, which I have no insight into what those were or if Miami removed him from the board. But it seems likely that they removed him or dropped him down because of the knee issues. And you also have to wonder, did he fit the style as much as we all thought? We'll find out. He went to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had one of my favorite draft classes. I think them, the Eagles, the Bengals, those three would probably be the top 3 for me. Indy would be up there as long as Richardson pans out. Those would be my top 4 classes from draft weekend. So Darnell Washington wasn't the pick. Now, DeJuan Jones is an interesting story. I myself am an Ohio State fan. I'm not a diehard, I'll probably watch 2 or 3 games a year at best, or at least the past couple years because of school. DeJuan had a really, really nice season in 2022 for the Buckeyes. Gave up 5 pressures. That's it in pass protection. No hits, no sacks, just 5 pressures. And he's a pretty good people mover in the run game. Now, say what you will about that. His technique could be cleaned up, but he's such a large and long individual that it almost doesn't matter. The only players that I can think of for comparison would be like I hate to throw Jonathan Ogden in the mix, but him, Bryant McKinney, like Phil Lodeholt, if you remember Lincoln Kennedy from the Raiders back in the 90s, early 2000s, and then maybe Trent Brown, probably the only other guy currently who are that size and that long. We're talking like 6'8" or taller and just big, massive human beings, 350 pounds or more. That's what DeJuan Jones is. Now, we heard this from a reliable source, Ryan Roberts, who does some consulting work, does some work within the Notre Dame Fighting Irish program, does his own draft stuff as well. We had heard that, I guess, last year at Ohio State, he played somewhere in between like 350 and 360. Kept his weight relatively in check. Shows up at the Senior Bowl, weighs in, does the measurements. Everyone goes gaga over the pterodactyl wingspan. Does really well for a day at 374 pounds, and then he just leaves. Doesn't finish the week. We don't know if it's an injury or what. If it was an injury, I had not seen it reported anywhere. So he goes to the combine, which is roughly almost 2 months later, weighs in again at 374. That should send up a little bit of an alert flag for you. Only does some of the things in the combine workout, another alert flag for you. And then says, I'm going to do the full workout at the pro day at Ohio State, which I think was several weeks, might have even been a full month later. And he instead opted to not show up and work out at all at the pro day. I'm citing like personal reasons or something like that. And it actually drew the ire of one NFL head coach. It wasn't Mike McDaniel, but drew the ire of one NFL head coach who was in attendance, who kind of audibly questioned DeJuan Jones not being there. And the rumor goes he's back up in the 390-pound range or some such like that. Now, by all accounts, DeJuan is a pretty good kid, fairly thoughtful, never got in trouble at Ohio State that I'm aware of, but clearly not getting good advice or not heeding advice if it is given, or just not having a good plan for the draft process probably caused him to slide all the way to day 3 where the Browns took him. So with that being the case, it's pretty reasonable to see why the Dolphins may not have had him on the board. And I do apologize. We've had some crazy weather here in Cincinnati, which has kicked up my allergies. So apologies if I don't sound my best on today's show. So that explains probably the two guys I thought they would go after at that point, because other targets, Matthew Bergeron was already gone. It seemed way, way too early to take a shot on like Blake Freeland or Tyler Steen, at least in my eyes. So Cam Smith is the pick. And maybe we glossed over a lot of obvious reasons for that. Looking at the big picture and kind of narrowing in, the Dolphins made the playoffs last year. And if you're going to improve upon and build to the next step or steps, however far they can go, in the AFC, look at the stalwart teams who've been in the playoffs the last 3, 4, 5 years. It's the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, the Bengals with Joe Burrow, the Bills with Josh Allen. You've got to combat those guys and get through it. And now Justin Herbert's got more ammunition. He was in the playoffs last year. Trevor Lawrence has more ammunition. He was in the playoffs last year. I mean, the AFC is basically a who's who of the top 8 quarterbacks in the league right now, Tua among them. But defensively, you're going to have to combat those weapons. And you look at the weapons that those teams have and the quarterbacks that those teams have, and you look at what plagued Miami last year, kind of the second rung as we narrow in a little bit, was the attrition they had in the secondary throughout the year. So there was the whole Byron Jones situation, which we've talked about. He's no longer a member of the Dolphins. It'll be official in less than a month now. But he didn't play a snap. And then you lost Nick Needham against the Vikings. You lost Brandon Jones against the Steelers. Was that the week before or the week after? So you're out there having to play Keon Crossan, Justin Bethel, Noah Igbenogany, Verone McKinley, and you had to go and do that in the playoff game against Buffalo. Those guys, Crossan, Bethel, McKinley, had meaningful snaps in a playoff game. And that's not what you want to do, having to face Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and the rest of the Buffalo Bills. Same, circumstance if you were playing another team. Name your team that was in the playoffs this year aside from Miami in the AFC. You likely would have had the same issues on defense. So it's addressing that need. And then narrowing in a little further, the two starting outside corners the Dolphins have, Xavier Howard, Jalen Ramsey, both members of the 2016 draft class. They're approaching 30, getting a little bit older. And both of them had, down years compared to their past levels of play last year for different reasons. I think the Rams were just a really gutted, bad, Super Bowl hangover-ridden team. And then Xavier Howard had groin injuries from week 2, and in his words, tried to thug it out and made things worse and couldn't get the rest that he needed to sustain a higher level of play throughout the rest of the season. Now, you kind of saw him have an uptick towards the end of the year, especially post-bye. That helped. But then again, the struggles kind of reared up in coverage against the Bills in the wild card game. But we also saw flashes of the X we all know and love, who made that sweet interception in the wild card game as well. So, and then on top of it, people don't want to be honest and they don't want to acknowledge this because Kader Kohou's a fun story as an undrafted free agent, but he wasn't very good covering anything beyond 10 yards. Just wasn't. He's better when he can keep things in front of himself, come up, click and close, make tackles. He was really good at that, and you probably want him in the slot. So those factors combined, you don't want him to have to play outside. And you have the versatile chess piece that is Jalen Ramsey, who they're going to use all over the field. Right corner, left corner, slot corner, dime backer, free safety, all the above. All those things combined, plus you have Vic Fangio telling Travis Wingfield in his introductory media availability that he's devised a new coverage during his 1-year sabbatical. Maybe those were the obvious signs that we missed right under our nose that defensive back was going to be a higher priority. So enter Cam Smith. Now, I'll be honest, I did not do a lot of work on him pre-draft, because I thought he would be off the board. I knew he was a good player. I'd seen South Carolina play a couple times and was impressed with both he and his running mate, Darius Rush, who I believe went in the 4th or 5th round to Indianapolis as well. So I just didn't do a ton of work on him, mostly because I didn't know the Dolphins had brought him in for a top 30 visit. The list I read to you guys on the last episode was just the guys I knew about. I think it was 7 names. So that meant there were 23 other 30 visits that the Dolphins had at their disposal that we didn't know about. Cam Smith was one of those. Now, how he fits is very intriguing to me. You look at what South Carolina does, it's a lot of match principles out of both man and zone coverages, which is what Vic Fangio does. You're going to see one cross, you're going to see one lurk, cover 3 with fire zone blitzes, cover 6, cover 8, which is the quarter, half stuff where you're playing quarters on one side and old school cover 2 on the other. Cover 8 is just the opposite of it, so strong and weak. Cam Smith is a great fit schematically for this defense because you look at what he does really well at South Carolina is he plays off coverage, and he's really, really, really good at deciphering route concepts, especially if he keeps them in front of him. He plays with great anticipation. He recognizes route combos, and he clicks and close to the ball very fast. Very good athlete, 4.4 guy. I've heard some reports that he ran in the 4.3s. Maybe at the South Carolina Pro Day or in testing or something like that, but 4.4 guy at the combine. Pretty good size, a little over 6 foot, 185-ish pounds. Someone that you can play in a number of roles. At South Carolina, he played in the slot, but again, it's an off-man system, so it's not like you're bumped up and playing press on the line of scrimmage in the slot. He played both right and left corner and played some safety in some more exotic coverages, we'll call it. Same sort of deal here, because Fangio disguises his rotations. You have safeties that will buzz down to the box, and you have a backside corner rotate. You'll play inverted cover 2, where the safeties chop down and the corners are the deep half players. All kinds of stuff you're going to see from this playbook, and Cam Smith has done it a lot. Very good ball awareness, much like Xavier Howard coming out, and also like Xavier Howard coming out kind of has a reputation of being a little handsy. That's sort of how corner play is. I mean, say what you want, but Sauce Gardner, Defensive Rookie of the Year last year, that's how he was at UC. But he was great. And if you're good with your technique, you can get away with that stuff. Jalen Ramsey does it, Xavier Howard does it, Sauce Gardner does it, Cam Smith has done it. That's sort of the MO of playing corner in today's NFL. So with Smith and his fit, it could happen in a lot of ways. Let's take the Bengals, for instance, last year as an interesting example. They drafted Cam Taylor-Britt, the corner from Nebraska, in the second round of last year's draft because they had Chidobe Awuzie, Eli Apple, and Mike Hilton were basically their starting trio from the team that went to the Super Bowl the year before. Well, Chidobe Awuzie tore his ACL mid-season, and they plucked Cam Taylor-Britt in the draft and inserted him into the lineup, and he played really well. He had a chance to develop, kind of got piecemealed some role, and some snaps, and developed into a starter, and now is, probably going to be the starting corner opposite Chidobe Awuzie because they didn't re-sign Eli Apple. So you could have an example like that where Cam Smith essentially just sits behind Howard and Ramsey, and then you insert him if you need him to. But I think Miami drafted him to be more of an immediate contributor. You look at Jalen Ramsey, and there's a great article by Jordan Rodrigue, who writes for The Athletic and covers the LA Rams. She went on Travis Wingfield's Drive Time podcast and talked about it as well, how the Rams moved Jalen Ramsey all over the place. They played him in the slot. They played him as a spy. They played him as a dime backer. Played him some as a safety, just to get him some action. Because before, it was sort of like Darrelle Revis or like Deion Sanders, where you just didn't throw it to his side of the field, and the rest of the game was basically a 10-on-10 battle. I think Miami's going to do the same thing. The issue I have with trying to do that is you don't want Kader Kohou playing outside. You want him in the slot as well. Enter Cam Smith. You can now move Ramsey to the slot and bring in Cam Smith as a more true perimeter corner to take on those roles. And then you can mix and match Kader Kohou in as a fourth corner or as a second slot guy, or overhang defender, or Ramsey as an overhang defender type of player and Kohou as the slot. Both of those things seem to me to be better options than having just Cam Smith sort of ride the behind X in Ramsey. And of course, to state the obvious, he's an insurance policy in case Howard or Ramsey start to decline, and you have to exercise, especially in the case of Xavier Howard, you have outs in his contract after the 2023 season and after the 2024 season. Now, I think as long as Howard stays healthy, he's going to see quite a renaissance in this system, just given his ball awareness, his veteran experience, his ability to decipher route combos. I think he's going to get at least 5 interceptions in this defense if he stays healthy. So what I think it does is it gives Miami a very deep cornerback group with the flexibility to play Jalen Ramsey wherever you want, including safety. And you don't have to worry about having to use guys like Keon Crossan or Justin Bethel or Noah Igbenogany in anything more than a break glass in case of emergency setting. Nick Needham coming off of the Achilles injury. We don't know if he's going to be back for week 1. May start the year on PUP. I've also heard some scuttle that he may be converted to safety. most fans don't recognize this, but he's cross-trained at safety the past 2 off seasons, both under Brian Flores and then last year under Josh Boyer. So he's cross-trained there. Maybe that's sort of a future home for him, And then the Trill Williams hype train, for me, never left the station. I talked to people who were at those practices every day, and the hype was sort of a little overblown, I think. And then there's also some scuttle that he may be moving to safety as well, just given his body type and background at Syracuse and what he put on film there versus playing as a perimeter corner. So Cam Smith gives the Dolphins options, and I think you're going to see him play a considerable amount this year because they want to move Jalen Ramsey, and because you, in my opinion, would be smart to kind of limit where schematically you play Kader Kohu. He needs to be on the field, but I wouldn't want him on the field as a perimeter corner against the team's number 1 or 2 wide receiver, if you get my meaning. In a vacuum, love the pick of Cam Smith. The waters are a bit muddied because of the circumstantial stuff that we didn't really know until after that selection came and went, the selection of Cam Smith, that is, about Darnell Washington specifically, and maybe to a lesser extent, DeJuan Jones. But I think Cam Smith is a great fit, and I think he's going to be a contributor from day one and then a probable starter down the road for you. So it'll be interesting to see how they use him in camp, and I can't wait to kind of get those practice reports. Pick 84, running back Devon Achane, and he pronounces it A-Chain in the video. I've seen people A-Chain and all that. It's A-Chain, and it's Devon, not Devin. Devon Achane. I was wrong about the Devon part, but Devon Achane, pick at 84, running back out of Texas A&M. That was the 30 visit I was not allowed to say on the podcast last week. I kind of figured that's who the pick was going to be when he was still on the board at 84, just given the information I knew. So I think if you watch me on the live stream, I've got the least surprised reaction out of the 4 of us. Reason absolutely loves Devon Achane. That was one of his, he calls them his draft crushes. That was one of his guys. Absolute speedster. To me, and I said this on the live stream, I can't help but think of Warwick Dunn, the old Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back, when I see Devon Achane, kind of built the same, low to the ground, about 190 pounds, good hands out of the backfield, speed for days, ran a 4.32. To me, kind of gives you a nice compliment to Mostert and Jeff Wilson, and then probably ends up being Raheem Mostert's replacement. That slashing, one cut and go, outside zone, speed type guy. And then you have Jeff Wilson as sort of the gap guy, because they run both the zone and gap stuff here in Miami. And with A-Chain, he did have to cut some weight because he did run track for Texas A&M. So he may end up being a guy who plays closer to 195 or 200 pounds for all that we know, just because he's no longer running track. So very interested to see how Mike McDaniel deploys him. I know they've got several packages last year that didn't really dive a whole much into. You think about the Jets game, the first Jets game on the road, where they had sort of the fly sweep to Raheem Mostert. That seems like a Devon Achane play to me. I think because you have so much speed now with not only Hill and Waddle, but you've added Braxton Berrios as sort of a true blue slot guy. You're probably going to keep one of the two between Cedric Wilson Jr. and Chosen Anderson as another speed guy that plays outside. Now you have a weapon with Devon Achane, who's got pretty good hands out of the backfield, who can attack the flats, who you can have little delayed release routes, running choice routes, Texas routes out of the backfield. And teams have to respect that speed. You're putting speed all over the field and forcing defenses to stretch themselves vertically and horizontally. So kind of the nits with A-Chain. You probably don't want him to be taking on your main pass blocking assignments just because he's a smaller guy. He's willing to do it. Probably don't want him taking on a Von Miller, as a one-on-one assignment if something goes wrong, you know what I mean? But I think he's a very effective pick. And, just loved it. I kind of felt like it was going to happen, once I knew about the 30 visit, which was a couple weeks before the draft. It was another late one. So, yeah, I mean, no complaints about that pick either, and I think for having just 2 picks in the first 3 rounds, getting guys as talented as Cam Smith and Devon A-Chain is a pretty nice haul for the Dolphins. It's unfortunate that they didn't have any picks on day 3 to kind of address the offensive line. Ended up with a 6th and a 7th round pick. Would have loved to have seen them try and get a 4th or a 5th. I don't know that Cedric Wilson would have brought that back in a return off of a trade, but just feels like, you missed something by not having picks there. And I think that's why Chris Grier basically came out and said after the draft that that's why he was so opposed to trading any assets from 2024, because they've had 2 really thin draft classes in Mike McDaniel's tenure so far. So the 2 day 3 picks, Elijah Higgins, the 6th round pick, I don't understand why the Dolphins are so invested in these conversion tight end projects. Like, it's spanned since really the Jeff Ireland era when they had Joe Philbin, when they tried Les Brown, who was a college basketball player, at tight end. Dan Campbell was the Dolphins tight end coach at that point. Les Brown didn't work out. They tried converting Montana State defensive end Bryce Stirk to a tight end under Brian Flores. They tried Mel Blunt's kid, Jabri Blunt, who was a college basketball player, tried converting him to tight end. That didn't work. The Dolphins are working on Tanner Connor going from an FCS receiver to a tight end. Let's call a spade a spade. He was a waste of a roster spot for more than half the season last year. He did nothing. And now you're doing it again with Elijah Higgins. It's fine. I think Higgins is a pretty good athlete, good size, 6'3", 240 some pounds, 230 some pounds, probably can play in the 240s because they had him cut weight at Stanford. Has good speed, 4.54 guy. Was able to stretch the field vertically from the seam, which, I've seen a couple people talk about how, well, this is the Mike Gesicki type player. Let's hold on a little bit with that, because, Eric Saubert is kind of that same type. And, I think what kind of tore me up about this pick was the guys that went the 3 picks right before it, being Keandre Coburn, the nose tackle from Texas who went to Kansas City. I thought that would have been an ideal target for Miami's nose position. A.T. Perry, the wide receiver from New Orleans, from Wake Forest, who went to New Orleans, who I thought would be gone a lot earlier. And then Jose Ramirez, the edge player from Eastern Michigan. Those 3 guys I thought all would have been really nice Dolphins picks, but they all went right off the board with Higgins. Now, there's really not a ton of opportunity costs that the Dolphins passed on here. Like, the names, they'd already taken a running back, but Deuce Vaughn went as a comp pick in the 6th round. Jarrett Patterson from Notre Dame, the offensive lineman, he played center, went. But other than that, there's really not a whole lot that they missed out on. So this seems more like a dart throw, developmental guy, which is fine. But if you're doing this again 2 years in a row, what does that say about Tanner Connor? Is his time on the roster, dwindling? Is it borrowed time at this point? Is it you just didn't have the draft picks to go get a tight end? Did the run start too early? Is there not a free agent out there that maybe would have fit better than Eric Saubert? it just sort of seems like they're sticking irons in the fire here with the tight end position. And, if you go back and watch Elijah Higgins at Stanford, there's really not a whole lot of him blocking from an inline or even a wing position. Now, I did see a couple people compare him to Jordan Reed. I think that's a fair comparison from a body type perspective and athleticism perspective. I think Jordan Reed was a better hands catcher than Elijah Higgins. Higgins had some drop issues. But what really kind of gets you going is the yards after catch ability. Miami, I believe, finished like second to last in the league in yards after catch last year. But that's also a factor because they were the second highest average depth of target in the league, at least with Tua. So, those things kind of marry up with each other. But now you look at, and Chris Kaufman from the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast pointed this out, you look at their selection of Eric Ezukama last year. If you watch him at Texas Tech, he's a yak monster, decent blocker. Sort of seems like the player that you hoped you were getting with Trent Sherfield. Elijah Higgins, kind of the same deal. A move tight end, guy who can motion, who can attack the slot vertically, but unlike Mike Gesicki, is a pain in the butt to bring down after the catch point. So it seems like now you've got your we'll call them your deep target guys, Hill and Waddle, who did most of their damage in the intermediate realm. And now you've got guys, Ezukama, Chosen Anderson, Cedric Wilson. You're probably rostering 2 of those 3 to keep outside on the perimeter as sort of big body, jump ball, possession, yards after catch types. And then you've got Berrios and Higgins who are going to play in the slot and can give you yak as well. So it seems like you're sort of bringing this whole vision together. Now, it's a 6th-round pick. If Higgins doesn't turn out well or you end up putting him on the practice squad or some such because there's another tight end that shakes free, so be it. It's a 6th-round pick. So I can't really fault that process in terms of picking Higgins, but I just wonder what is the fascination with these tight end conversion projects versus just drafting someone who was a tight end in college. Now, in the 6th round at this point, the board was picked clean. Like Zach Kuntz is really the only tight end name that you saw go after Braden Willis from Oklahoma in the 7th round. Those are really the only 2 guys that go later on. So, interesting decision there. That one just kind of bears watching. Like I said, take it or leave it. If he makes the roster, great. If not, it's a 6th-round pick. Same kind of deal goes for Ryan Hayes, the left tackle from Michigan, who I had probably seen play more than any of the other draft picks just because I live in Big Ten country and Michigan's on quite a bit. Built like Liam Eichenberg, but he's got the short arms also like Liam Eichenberg. Seems to be a little more athletic by my eyes, just watching the games and watching some film on him. Good run blocker, probably not the ideal pass blocking type you want to have as a tackle in the NFL. So maybe the Dolphins try him there, but I wonder if he ends up sliding inside to guard. But has enough movement and athleticism and size to kind of, could he challenge someone like a Kendall Lamb or a Jerron Christian to be a swing tackle? I think, the answer is probably yes. So, again, 7th-round pick, take it or leave it. If he makes the roster over one of those guys, great. If not, it's a 7th-round pick. So, I think the Dolphins draft haul, I hate grading things. To me, Cam Smith and Devon Achane give you pretty good value for just having those 2 picks in the first 3 rounds. Hopefully, Stephen Ross has learned his lesson. Bruce Beal seems to have been excommunicated from the organization. Rightly so, for the Tom Brady tampering stuff. But man, having that extra first-round pick, if you could have taken a player like a Mozzie Smith or traded down and gotten more draft capital, probably would feel a lot better about this class. But to me, it really hinges on the 2 players. Cam Smith and Devon Achane, much like last year's class, hinges on the development of Channing Tindall and Eric Ezukama. Hopefully next year Miami will keep those high resources and you can get impact starters from day one. Looking at the Dolphins undrafted free agent class, there's like 22 guys now with the additions of James Tunstall, the tackle from UC, and then Keandre Smith, the defensive back from Kentucky. Looking at the class, there's really 3 guys that kind of stand out, and I don't really care about the guaranteed money to UDFAs. Like they're UDFAs for a reason. That guaranteed money is a drop in the hat for Stephen Ross. Like, he doesn't care. The 3 that stand out, James Tunstall, the tackle from UC, is an interesting one. I've seen him play in person twice. Tough player, had battled through some injuries at UC 2 years ago when they went to the college football playoff. Was their left tackle for Desmond Ridder. He's got the length, even though he doesn't look like it, kind of like Teron Armstead, where he's just barely in that 6'5" range. He's just barely got the arms long enough. You can look at him and see, okay, he needs some body development. You need to convert some of that bad weight into good weight. Work on your athleticism. Kind of strikes me as a guy that, of all the undrafted free agents, plus Ryan Hayes, the other tackle free agents being Jarrett Horst from Michigan State and Alex Jensen from North Dakota, Tunstall seems like the guy who's got the best shot to be a tackle in the league. Even then, I feel compelled to want to move him inside to guard. Jensen's probably built most like a tackle, but you're coming from an FCS school, so that's a big jump. The other 2 undrafted free agents that caught my eye are on defense. Brandon Peely from USC, the nose tackle. That was one position Miami didn't really address, and we know that they spent time with several of the defensive line guys in the draft. I do kind of wonder if they had a 4th or 5th round pick, or if Keandre Coburn had fallen to them in the 6th round. Was he the pick over Elijah Higgins, or would they have drafted someone else, in rounds 4 and 5? Peely's an older prospect. He was part of USC's 2017 incoming freshman class, so he's been there 6 years. Got a COVID red shirt and then another red shirt, I believe. Big guy, 6'3", played in the 340-pound range. I've seen 2 reports now that say he's down in between 315 and 320, which has been kind of the sweet spot for Vic Fangio. I don't remember him standing out one way or another when I've seen him play at USC, but he's really the only guy they've brought in to be defensive line depth, and you've got Josiah Bronson and Jalen Twyman as your other guys at this point. So he might have a realistic shot. And then the last one was Jackson State linebacker Aubrey Miller. Right now, looking at off-ball linebackers, there's only 5 on the roster. You've got the 4 guys, David Long, Jerome Baker, Channing Tindall, Duke Riley, and then Aubrey Miller. Feels like Aubrey Miller might win a job outright. Maybe he takes on a special teams role like Sam Aguavin did for the Dolphins last year. Maybe you can get him to unseat like Duke Riley as sort of a 4th linebacker type guy. Big hitter for his size, 6 foot, slightly under 230 pounds. Good blitzer. Probably not a guy that you want doing a lot of exotic things in coverage the way that you could use, David Long, Jerome Baker, and Channing Tindall with, but serves his purpose, kind of, I don't want to say the Elandon Roberts of this defense, but like Fangio's always kind of found a way to get guys who are, undersized, 4'8" running guys to just come in and be solid players. That kind of strikes me as what Aubrey Miller could be. So, that's the Dolphins draft class and undrafted free agent class and my thoughts on it. I think where they go from here now, You won't see this reported, but there was a free agent offensive lineman visit to the building since the draft. I can't say who. Kind of the same deal like the Devon Achane 30 visit thing. But I think that speaks to Miami's interest in adding a veteran on the offensive line to compete with Austin Jackson at right tackle. That to me is kind of the next move. And then I think you'll see, more work done on the Christian Wilkins extension. From there, Connor Williams, Robert Hunt, Zach Sealer would be kind of the next in line guys. So those are my draft thoughts. Would love to hear what you guys think, or if you have questions for me, hit me up on the show. If there's a whiskey that you want me to try and do a review on, mention it. I'll see if I can find it. That's going to do it for me. Have a great week, guys. Stay safe. Fins up.